Okay, folks, I think we should get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Chet Kerr. I'm a member of the board of the Irvington Historical Society, and I'm welcome everyone here today to our presentation about the Ardsley train station. So a couple things to start. We are recording this session, and as we do with all of our programs, we will be posting a video of this up on our website in a couple of days. And there will also be a question and answer session at the end. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, either during the talk or at the end. And at the end of the presentation, I will look through those questions, and if I can answer them, I'll try to do so. So we're going to speak today about the Ardsley train station and what it can tell us about our history. And what I find really interesting is that the messages it can offer us and about our history are messages that in many ways we hear and continue to wrestle with today. So first point, the Ardsley train station is a reflection of the Gilded Age as it existed at the end of the 19th century and at the beginning of the 20th century in both the United States generally, and especially as it was experienced here in the New York City area. There was incredible income and wealth disparity. The very rich were in the news and the subject of public envy and public fascination. And many of them had large homes and big yachts, and they lived very different lives than the everyday folks that populate the city. Actually, during the 1890s, the county of Westchester was the richest county in the United States, and the town of Greenburgh was the richest town in the county of Westchester. And along the eastern side of the Hudson River, between Yonkers and probably Sleepy Hollow, there were more millionaire summer homes and estates than anywhere else in the country. Well, today we have tech entrepreneurs who have made billions, are in the news, and are the subject of public fascination. And their world is far removed from most of us. They again own big yachts and big homes, but now they build rocket ships and plan to fly to Mars. The second point is the Ardsley train station reflects a shift in the way people lived in and around big cities. At the time it was built, people were beginning to think about balance of their lives, and thinking about living outside cities in the countryside, but commuting into the city each day for work, something that many of us take for granted today. But this was the beginning of a new social and demographic shift in our country towards suburban living. Interesting, today we're wrestling with similar issues as we rethink, excuse me, how we work in light of the pandemic, how we separate, and if we can separate our personal lives from our work lives. So hopefully everyone is familiar with the Ardsley-on-Hudson train station, which is one of the two stops in Irvington on the Metro North Hudson line. The train station building that we see in this picture on the screen, which was taken about 1897, the train station still looks that way today. And while there's now a walkway built by Metro North over the train tracks themselves, the station, both the architecture of the station, the roof line, the tower of the station, are all as they were when it was built 125 years ago, starting today. So let's get started. So the Ardsley-on-Hudson train station is one of the oldest buildings in the Ardsley Park neighborhood. Originally constructed as a private train station for the exclusive use of club members of the new Ardsley Casino in Ardsley Park. In addition to serving as a train station, the adjacent dock, which was built alongside the train station, served as club station number 9 for the New York Yacht Club. And New York Yacht Club members, who were also members of the Ardsley Casino, would sail up from New York City on large steam yachts, which they would anchor in the Hudson River when visiting the club. Another interesting thing about the train station, it has continuously operated as a post office for Irvington and the Ardsley Park neighborhood for over 120 years. Now, you can't talk about Ardsley Park, you can't talk about the Ardsley Park train station without talking about Omsie Barber, who was really the visionary of what became Ardsley Park in Irvington. The Ardsley Park neighborhood in Irvington and Dobbs Ferry was originally part of Cyrus Field's country estate, which he called Ardsley. It was named after his family's estate back in England. And most of you know Cyrus Field made his renown when he led the syndicate that laid the first telegraphic cable across the Atlantic Ocean in about 1860 and created direct communication between Europe and North America. And that made him internationally known and an incredibly wealthy man. He was worth hundreds of millions of dollars at the time. But after receiving kind of international acclaim and financial success for laying the first cable, he decided to invest in Wall Street and invested specifically in the Manhattan Elevated Railroad stock, which was one of the new elevated railroads that were the craze at the time in New York City. They were building these elevated railroads up 3rd Avenue and up the West Side as a way of getting people to move around the city more efficiently as the city's population grew. But in June of 1887, two of his supposed partners in that venture, Jay Gould and Russell Sage, manipulated the market. They saw that Fields was exposed. He had highly leveraged his stock. So they basically manipulated the market to put him in a squeeze. And over the course of about 4 or 5 hours in June of 87, he was forced to sell all of his stock to Jay Gould at a substantial discount. And literally over the course of a day, he lost almost his entire fortune, all of his net worth at the time. And so therefore, he was suddenly very property rich, but cash poor. So in August of 1887, Fields sold all of his property on the west side of Broadway, between Broadway and the Hudson River. And that's kind of the part of Ardsley Park today that he owned at the time. And that included the mansion Newport, which is still here in Irvington and Ardsley Park. He sold all his property to John Jacob Astor III. 3 years later, he was forced to sell over 670 acres of his Ardsley estate, which was on the east side of Broadway, the eastern part of Irvington and much of the village of Ardsley as it exists today. And he sold that to another syndicate who went on to develop much of the village of Ardsley. He and his family still owned about 130 or so acres in Irvington, mostly on the east side of Broadway. He had built a series of homes around his estate for his children, but both Fields and his children were forced to mortgage their properties heavily to continue to thrive. And those large summer estates were Fields' personal summer estate, which he called the homestead, a large mansion called Ardsley Towers, which had been built by his son Edward Field in about 1881. And that Ardsley Towers was up on Field Terrace, which is about 300 yards east of where I'm sitting today. And another one of these large houses was the Ionada, which was another large house up on Field Terrace, again, just east of where I am today. And actually, that house is still here in Irvington, and you can see it if you go up in Field Terrace today. Now, just about this time, Omsie Barber, who was called the Asphalt King for reasons that I'll explain, was living in Washington and was planning to move to New York, hoping to get involved with the new business and social elite of New York. So who was Omsie Barber? Omsie Barber was born in 1843 in Vermont. He was the son of Reverend Omsie Doolittle Barber, who was a congregational minister and who had I'm not sure where he was in Vermont, but he had a church that he ran. But when Barber was about 6 or 7, his family left Vermont and moved to Ohio, where Barber grew up. Barber ended up going to Oberlin College. And when he finished college, he had plans to become a congregational minister himself. He took about a year of further courses at Oberlin toward that end. But he was then solicited to become a member of the faculty of the new Howard University, which had just been created in Washington, D.C. by the leaders of the Freedmen's Bureau. And Howard University had been built or been created as a new educational high school and college for all of the new freemen and blacks that had been emancipated as a result of the Civil War. And Barber became a professor of natural philosophy and mathematics at Howard University, and actually briefly served as the acting president of the university in the fall of 1872. But by that time in 1872, Barber's first wife had died, and he had remarried, and his new wife's family was involved with real estate. And so he decided, in late 1872, he resigned his post at Howard University to go into the real estate business in Washington, D.C. with his brother-in-law, Andrew Langdon. And Omsie Barber and his brother-in-law purchased several tracts of land next to Howard University, in kind of the northern side of Washington, D.C. They purchased that land for about $50,000 and combined that property to create a new kind of neighborhood, which they named Ardsley Park, which was a new development of single-family homes within Washington, D.C. And an interesting quirk about Barber, even though he had been a professor at Howard University, which had been created specifically to offer educational opportunities for Blacks right after the Civil War, he and his brother-in-law decided to make Ardsley Park their new suburban community, which is right on the border of Howard University. They made it an exclusively white community, and they excluded anybody who was not white. And clearly they were marketing this for a lot of the new post-Civil War politicians and businessmen who were traveling to Washington, D.C. And it was an example of, I think, a very focused effort by Barber in terms of how he markets what he saw as his new real estate development to his advantage. Hang on for 1 second. But that really wasn't his path to riches. In 1876, President Grant was very unhappy with the fact that the roadway on Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House was a dirt road and very messy and all the time. So he asked the Army Corps of Engineers to recommend a new way of paving Pennsylvania Avenue. And after some study, they recommended that sheet asphalt be used to repave Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C., and they did so. And it turned out to be very, very successful. Now, Barber quickly realized that other cities across the United States would also be interested in paving their streets in this way, and quickly secured a franchise to take asphalt from Pitch Lake in Trinidad. Now, at this time, almost all the asphalt that was being used around the world was being taken from this Pitch Lake, and it was a naturally forming asphalt lake in Trinidad, and farmers would go out and pull the asphalt out, ship it to the United States, and then it would be used to pave streets around the country. And this part of Barber's business grew, and in 1883, he formed the Barber Asphalt Company, which was very successful. And within 3 or 4 years, and after buying out all the other small local asphalt farmers in Trinidad, Barber secured a 42-year concession from the British government for the entire production of Pitch Lake. And over the next 7 years, Barber's companies laid 16 million yards of Trinidad asphalt pavement in 80 cities across the United States. He became one of the richest men in the United States as a result of that. And so in 1888, Barber realized that if his business would continue to grow, he needed to move to New York City to be nearer the center of commerce. And so he moved his business into New York City, and as he wanted to do for somebody who was part of the new, or saw himself as part of the new elite rich business community, he purchased the old Kennard estate in the Grimes Hill section of Staten Island and used it as his summer residence. And interestingly, at this time, for the first time, Staten Island was being seen by residents of both Brooklyn and of Manhattan as a possible place for people to live and then travel into Brooklyn or Manhattan on ferries to work, a new sense of suburbia. But it was also this place where a lot of the very wealthy would create these summer estates. And in 1890, as part of his continued social climb within New York City, he joined the New York Yacht Club. And the New York Yacht Club at that time was part of the creme de la creme of the social elite in New York City. And Barber decided he wanted to get into yachting, and he soon purchased the 120-foot steam yacht Sapphire and saw himself as part of this elite group that would have these large steam yachts. They would sail up and down and participate in New York Yacht Club activities. But after using his summer estate on Staten Island for only 4 years, Barber seized the opportunity to purchase parts of Cyrus Field's estate in Irvington, having seen Field's financial circumstances deteriorate completely. Where Cyrus Field was in Irvington, had much easier access to New York City because of the trains that went up and down the Hudson River. So in 1892, Barber, 2 months after the death of Cyrus Fields, Barber purchased Ardsley Towers, this large mansion on the Field estate. And as I mentioned, Ardsley Towers had been built by Field for his son, Edward Field, in 1881. Now, Edward Field had been very involved on Wall Street. And when Cyrus Field got manipulated the market and lost all of his stock in 1887, Edward Field got caught up in that and continued. He also was heavily extended and ultimately was found to have sold stock he did not own. And it was a tremendous scandal, and he was forced to leave his brokerage company. And he, in fact, had a nervous breakdown, was put in an asylum for much the rest of his life. His wife, however, and Cyrus Field's daughter-in-law, Clara Field, continued to live in Ardsley Towers until Cyrus Field's death. But in 1892, as again part of the financial pressure, she sold this beautiful mansion to Omsie Barber as his new summer estate up in Irvington. Now, Barber purchased Ardsley Towers for about $10,000 plus the assumption of a $115,000 mortgage. That $125,000 was worth about $3.8 million today. So a very, very expensive summer estate. And at that time, Barber was only 49 years old. But 3 years later, Barber purchased from Cyrus Field's estate another 102.7 acres, which was all of the land on the east side of Broadway that Field owned at the time of his death. Now, Barber also purchased the land between Broadway and the Hudson River. And if you remember, as I described earlier, because of his losses in the market, Field, who owned this property, had been forced to sell all of this property between Broadway and the Hudson River to John Jacob Astor III. And this included the Italian mansion Newits, as well as the land under the Hudson River to the west of the train station. Now, this map, which is actually from 1899, but shows all of this property. You see Broadway on the right and the Hudson River in the train station, this train line on the left, and it shows all this property that Barber was able to buy. Now, it turned out that John Jacob Astor, after purchasing this property from Field, he died in 1890, and at that time, his estate sold all this property to Manhattan College. Manhattan College had a campus in northern parts of Manhattan College, but they were looking to expand their their campus and thought that they would purchase this property up in Irvington and build out their new campus right along the Hudson River. Beautiful spot. But when Field had sold this property to John Jacob Astor, he had put a restrictive covenant in the deed, which provided that no public institution could purchase or hold this property. And the Manhattan College, when they bought it, realized that that could put prevent them from building out the new campus. And there was a big fight they had with Field, who was still alive at the time. And they tried to offer him money to allow him to waive this restriction. But at this time, Field still owned the estate on the east side of Broadway, and he refused to budge. So Manhattan College ultimately could not build its campus at this part. So when Barber was looking to expand his property, he was able to purchase from Manhattan College, a total of an additional almost 65 acres of property. So what was Barber's vision? What did he want to do with all this new property he was buying? So his vision, I think, had two parts. One, as the Gilded Age had developed in the late 1800s, the very wealthy and social elite who lived in New York and in Boston would often leave their urban mansions for the summer and descend on what they called summer colonies. And one of the first of these summer colonies was the Newport Casino, built in 1881 in Newport, Rhode Island. And while it was called a casino, it actually wasn't a place for gambling, and instead was a summer resort and a theater for the wealthy elite. But this was a very, very exclusive club. The cream of New York City society was guarded by its arbiter, Carolyn Webster Shimmerhorn Astor, who was the wife of William Astor, who was the heir to all of the Astor fortune. And this group of elite became known as the 400, was actually 370 families, which was essentially the number of guests who could comfortably fit into the ballroom in Mrs. Astor's summer home in Newport, which she called Beechwood, where she would hold a lavish summer ball every year. And so the very top of society of New York very much wanted to be part of this, part of the 400. Barber wanted to be part of the 400. And they were seen as a separate society from much of the rest of the country. There was another well-known resort that they would sometimes go to, which was the Tuxedo Club up in Tuxedo Park, which had been founded in 1886 by Pierre Lorillard IV. So what Barber envisioned was creating a new exclusive summer resort along the Hudson River just north of the city, much closer to New York City, surrounded by a neighborhood of wealthy homes and summer estates. That was his vision. The second part of his vision, however, for this new property he owned was to create a community that appealed to what was being referred to as the new suburban. And Barber's pitch for this Ardsley Park neighborhood was to become part of this new suburbia, where the added allure of living close to wealthy neighbors. And it was right at this time, right in the early 1890s, that this new concept of suburbia had come into being. There was a widely read article by an author named G.T. Ferris, which was in the January 1892 copy of Harper's Weekly, entitled The Suburban, that tried to capture the new idea of living outside the city, but commuting into the city by train every day to go to work. And there's, from Ferris's article, there's a quote I want to read for you, which I just think is, for all of us, including myself, who commuted into New York City for many, many years, often through the Ardsley train station, I think is apt. He described this new suburbia as, quote, metropolitan annexes, each alive with public spirit and smartly conscious of its own individuality, despite the fact that most of the prominent residents are sucked each morning into the whirlpool of the big city to be vomited forth again at night. And how many of us have, as we get on the train or off the train, have kind of perceived ourselves a little that way. But I think Barber was trying to capture some of this new idea. And the green quote in the slides is a quote from a Ardsley Park brochure that was put together probably in 1896 or 1897. But this was Barber's pitch for what this new Ardsley Park neighborhood. So reads, consider what it means to live amid these surroundings with the city so near and yet so far away. 20 miles that are covered in 40 minutes by train and 50 minutes by motor. Although this garden spot of Westchester County has for long gladdened the hearts of people of wealth, one does not have to be a millionaire to enjoy it. To the contrary, the property now offered for sale has been so apportioned as to appeal particularly to gentlemen of moderate means who can thoroughly appreciate that delightful state of mental relaxation which is inspired by the beauties of nature after hours of business spent in town. So think about that, and think about the reasons why people who live in the city in Brooklyn or Manhattan and start, creating a family, suddenly they decide that they want to move out of the city up to somewhere in the suburbs, up near Irvington, for say, where they get a little more access to green space, a little more access to the outdoors. But one of the draws, many of you will admit, is that some of these communities are frankly very well-to-do, and there is an allure to being around people perhaps who are more wealthy. And this is one of the pitches that Barber realized would be a successful part of his new draw for Ardsley Park. And it was very overtly part of his plan to create this highly exclusive club, the new Ardsley Casino, that would be surrounded by this new suburban community where some of the people would be club members, very wealthy, but other people would be, as he described it, gentlemen of moderate means. So in August of 1895, Barber formed a syndicate of investors to purchase land for the Ardsley Casino. And this syndicate of investors were some of the very wealthy elite of New York City. They included Edwin Gould, Cyrus Field Judson, who was Cyrus Field's son-in-law, Philip Schuler, who owned the Nevis estate, J.P. Morgan Jr., John D. Rockefeller, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, and Chauncey Mitchell Depew. And of specific importance to our discussion about the Ardsley train station today was Cornelius Vanderbilt II and Chauncey Mitchell Depew. Cornelius Vanderbilt was the chairman of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company, and Chauncey Mitchell Depew was the president of the railroad company. And that meant that they had both an active interest in this new Ardsley Casino in the Ardsley Park area, but they had control over the nearby railroad. So the original concept, as put together by Barber, was to create a country residence club along with a hotel and casino, similar to the one in Newport. And the Ardsley Casino would sit above the Hudson River, surrounded by a golf course and a new 200-acre park in which club members and new suburbanites could purchase residence. And this part of the allure of this new club would be the golf course, meeting the growing interest in this new sport. And golf was a relatively new sport. It kind of been developed in the United States in the mid-1880s. And actually the first golf course in the United States was in Yonkers. It was St. Andrews in Yonkers. But it was seen by some of the new social elite as an outdoor recreational activity that they could do. And so Barber's vision was to create a golf course around the Ardsley Casino as a further draw for people to join this new club. So Barber hired, actually the syndicate hired, an architectural firm of Trowbridge, Colt, and Livingston to draw plans for this new clubhouse, a dockhouse and boathouse, and the railroad station to be known as Ardsley-on-Hudson. And the Trowbridge, Colt, and Livingston had been formed in 1894 by three architects: Samuel Breck Parkman Trowbridge, Stockton B. Colt, and Goodhue Livingston. And they were known for their commercial buildings, institutional buildings, many in what was then called the Beaux Arts or neoclassical style. And both Trowbridge and Colt had studied at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris and were trained in what was referred to as modern French style of architecture. Trowbridge and Livingston were, perhaps more importantly, very well connected with the very wealthy in New York. And one of their earliest commissions was, in fact, redesigning portions of a Vanderbilt mansion in New York City. And that may well have been their connection to getting this job for the syndicate. And so this is a photograph of Mr. and Mrs. Goodhue Livingston and Mrs. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt. And the woman who's, you see her left side, she's closest, that's Mrs. Vanderbilt. And she was Cornelius Vanderbilt II's daughter-in-law. Goodhue Livingston's on the left, and his wife is a little behind, facing him as he's talking to Mrs. Vanderbilt. And Louisa Robb Livingston, Goodhue Livingston's wife, was the daughter of J. Hampton Robb, a Harvard-educated banker and a cotton merchant. And she grew up shifting between the mansions in Southampton and the mansions on Park Avenue. And both Goodhue Livingston and Louise Robb's families were very socially prominent. They had descended from old Dutch and colonial aristocracy and were well connected in to many of the very wealthy who were the initial members of the syndicate and the initial club members for the Arsley Casino. Now, in addition to hiring this prominent architectural firm to design the clubhouse and the train station, Barber also retained Samuel Parsons Jr. and his partner, George Pentecost, as landscape architects to design the grounds surrounding the casino and the train station. And Parsons had worked for Frederick Law Olmsted and Culver Vaux, and from 1895 to about 1911, he was the principal landscape architect for Central Park in New York City. And again, Parsons and Pentecost were well connected into the social elite. So this gave this new Ardsley Casino venture and the train station automatic credibility, both by its architects and its landscape architects. So in November of 1895, the Ardsley Casino was incorporated to acquire real estate and to construct a club building, piers, houses, and stables in or near Irvington. And the planned Ardsley Casino was described in the press as a country club for millionaires. And one of the titles of an article was "Rich Men Up the Hudson Building a Casino to be the Headquarters of Social Pleasures." And these articles that I'm sure Barber was pushing into the press said the membership would be very limited in number and consist largely of swells who made up the top tier of society. And the way they structured the membership, in fact, interesting, under the bylaws of the Ardsley Casino, the president and vice president of the United States, the president's cabinet, the governor of New York, the mayor of New York City, the general of the army, and the admiral of the navy were honorary members. So that was brought even more cachet to the club. Barber was really a master of marketing and realized that selling the idea that the Ardsley Casino Club was an exclusive home of the very wealthy elite was one both important to get membership of the new Ardsley Casino, bring in new members, but it was also important for the future buyers of lots in Ardsley Park that was going to surround this Ardsley Club. And he saw them as both things he could do by promoting this idea that the Ardsley Casino was the creme de la creme of wealthy New York City. So I said, so selling the idea of the famous Ardsley Casino also involved having a private and very exclusive train station and dock, providing access to the club. And that was an important marketing tool for the new Ardsley Casino. This is a report from a local newspaper. The site of the new casino overlooks the Hudson, so that the view from the piazza and windows will be magnificent. A big pier is to be built so that businessmen can come up on their yachts, and a covered passageway would lead up from the railroad depot. So the train station would match the architectural design of the casino and would be connected by a covered walkway, and would be for the exclusive use of the members of the casino. You needed to get a special ticket, a special pass to take the trains. The trains only stopped at the casino during the summer season when members would be going back and forth. And otherwise, the general riders on the Hudson River, on the New York Central and Hudson River line, would just go right by the train station and never stop. So how could this happen? How did Barber successfully get a private train station on the Hudson River line? I'm actually not aware of any other private station that was built with the size and splendor of the Ardsley train station. Well, the railroad along the eastern shore of the Hudson River had originally been formed as the Hudson River Railroad Company in 1846, and it began operating trains up the Hudson River shoreline in 1849. And in fact, Irvington was created in 1850. The new village of Irvington was called Dearman at first and then changed its name to Irvington. Was created in 1850 with the arrival of the new trains. Now, Cornelius Vanderbilt, the grandfather of Cornelius Vanderbilt II, one of the original founding members of the Arsley Casino, he had bought control of the Hudson River Railroad in 1864, and then control of what was then the New York Central Railroad in 1867. And in 1869, he consolidated those two companies and formed the New York Central and Hudson Railroad Company. Ultimately, that company controlled either directly or indirectly many of the rail lines between New York City and Chicago. It was one of the largest railroads in the country. And Cornelius Vanderbilt's grandson, Cornelius Vanderbilt II, became chairman of the board of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company in 1883. So this is a picture of, on the left, you see Cornelius Vanderbilt and his wife. On the right, you see Chauncey M. Depew. So Cornelius Vanderbilt II, he was the favorite grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt. And Cornelius Vanderbilt bequeathed him $5 million in 1887, which is about $137 million today. But he was also the eldest son of William H. Vanderbilt, who bequeathed Cornelius Vanderbilt II $70 million in 1885, which is worth about $2.1 billion today. So Cornelius Vanderbilt was incredibly wealthy. And as the chairman of the New York Central and Hudson Railroad Company, essentially had exclusive control over the company and its operations. Chauncey M. Depew on the right was a lawyer. He had was named as one of Vanderbilt's lawyers in the early 1860s and ultimately became the lawyer for all of the Vanderbilt Railroad Empire. And he probably in 1875. And he was later named as the president of the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company. So both Vanderbilt and Depew were part of Omsie Barber's original syndicate to form the Arsley Casino, and were in a unique position to deliver to the new casino the right to build this private railroad station. And so that was really what allowed to be done. And so as the Arsley Casino Company was being built, Barber conveyed some key parcels to the Ardsley Casino to be used for the new club. And this is a map of what was then the property that the casino was on. This is now where Hudson House is. And you'll see that this street right here, that was marked out, and that's what became Ardsley Avenue West as it went down here to this new, that's the train station, the private train station that was built to match the casino. This property was still owned by Barber, as well as this street, but this property here was given to the casino to build its new clubhouse. And this property over here was given to the casino to build its stables, and ultimately became the stables, and then the horse carriage location for all of the country club and all of its members. Okay. So Barber, not to perhaps be outdone by Vanderbilt and by Depew, decided that, yeah, they'd get a private train station, but I wanted to campaign to make the adjacent dock at the Ardsley Casino a New York Yacht Club station. So the New York Yacht Club, for a number of years, had had a practice of creating stations along the eastern shoreline of between New York and Newport and further up, where members could anchor their yachts and get supplies and transact business by telephone or by telegraph. And these were exclusive anchorages where the exclusive members of the club could go and stop. They could have supplies provided there. They would have access to communications, and they could talk to Wall Street when they needed to. And they were intended to be the club's way houses along the favorite cruising waters of America. So Barber, who was a member of the Yacht Club, had himself appointed as a flag officer on the New York Yacht Club's Committee on Sites, Stations, and Floats for 1896. And then he orchestrated that in March of 1886, the management of the new Ardsley Casino wrote to the Yacht Club seeking that the dock along the railroad station would become a new station. And lo and behold, the New York Yacht Club Board of Directors approved. And that made, so suddenly the train station was not only this private train station with a private station house, but its dock on the Hudson River was now this special station for the Yacht Club. And so this is an image of, this was probably taken maybe in 1903 or so, of the casino. You can see the train station there and the casino above it, and the structure in front of the train station on the river was constructed as the station number 9 for the New York Yacht Club. And Omsie Barber became the first New York Yacht Clubber member in charge of the station when the Ardsley train station opened in 1896. And there were a number of connections between the Ardsley Casino and the New York Yacht Club. The very first president of the Ardsley Casino was Philip Schuler. His father, George Schuler, was a founder of the New York Yacht Club in 1844. Club members of the Ardsley Casino, J.P. Morgan and Cornelius Vanderbilt II, were both commodores of the New York Yacht Club. Morgan was the commodore from 1897, 1893, and it was actually Cornelius Vanderbilt III. He was the commodore of the New York Yacht Club from 1906 to 1908. And a number of the members of the Ardsley Casino were also members of the New York Yacht Club. And this is another image. This was probably drawn in, this is a postcard actually, that was in the Historical Society's records of the station number 9, probably around 1900. So throughout the early 1896, they built the casino, they built the train station, and the grand opening of the casino and the train station and the dock was Declaration Day in 1896. Now, Declaration Day would later become known as Memorial Day. So it was over the weekend of late May, of May 29th and 31. And it was heralded with this grand ball with over 800 guests at the Ardsley Casino that opening Friday evening. And there was a special train that was sent from Grand Central Station that conveyed many of the guests up to the club's private train station. And other guests arrived through their private yachts and launches and anchored off the train station, which was the station number 9. And then on Saturday, there was this grand auto race from City Hall in New York City up to the Ardsley Country Club and back, which was organized by John Brisbane Walker, who owned the Cosmopolitan magazine. And for those of you who have been to other presentations, by the Historical Society, you know that John Brisbane Walker, who had purchased the Cosmopolitan magazine, had built the new Cosmopolitan building in Irvington. And he was as much of a marketer as Omsie Barber was. And so he was very interested in autos, the new horseless carriages, and he had written a bunch of articles about them in Cosmopolitan magazine. So he organized this race that would go from City Hall up to actually the Cosmopolitan building, then down to the Ardsley Country Club. And some of the members of the Ardsley Country Club would be the judges to decide who won. And then they'd all drive back to New York City over the course of the day. And so this was a big event. And then on Sunday of this opening weekend, the very first golf tournament was held among the new members of the club. And at this time in the summer of 1896, the only 9 holes had been built at the country club. Actually, the back 9 wouldn't be built for another year or two, actually in 1897. But the front 9 was very dramatic. It had been designed by a club pro named Willie Dunn, who was this Scottish club pro who came and designed the course. And it was right along the river. And it went south from the new casino down to the area much of which today is part of the Mercy campus, south of Irvington, and had very dramatic shots over the ravines over the river. And so these are some images from the Cosmopolitan horse carriage race that occurred that day. And as I said, this was all been orchestrated by John Brisbane Walker. The race actually started at noon at City Hall, and the first car, a Doria, reached Kingsbridge, which is right along the Harlem River, at about 1:05 p.m. It took about an hour to get up there. And they had to refill the water tanks of the cars. Then the remaining cars headed off toward Irvington, and all the judges who were in Kingsbridge, they were put on a special train and brought up to the Ardsley Casino, stop at the private train station up there. And the first car to reach the Ardsley Club that afternoon was Doria number 1, which reached the Ardsley Club about 3:15 and was declared the winner of this. But the driveway at the clubhouse was so steep that they had to push these horseless carriages. They didn't have enough horsepower to get up to the clubhouse. They then drove back into New York City, and the Doria number 1 got back to City Hall about 7:15 that night. So this is an image of the new Ardsley Casino clubhouse as it was designed and built in 1896. And for those of you who are familiar with the train station, you see the same design in the clubhouse that you see in the train station. And this actually is looking on the grounds, looking kind of northwest. And so the Hudson River is on the other side, and this clubhouse overlooked the train station. And so here's an image, again, this is the image that we started off with, of the train station situated below the clubhouse, and the clubhouse is on the bluff above the train station. And you can also see the dock leading from the train station out to what was then club station number 9 for the New York Yacht Club. And this is another shot. This was taken from the veranda of the Ardsley Casino clubhouse, overlooking the train station. And so interesting, just terminology, although it was called Ardsley Casino when it was opened in 1896, the head of the board of the Ardsley Casino decided to change the name just to the Ardsley Club and not to call it the casino anymore, because the plans of building a hotel didn't go forward, and they didn't have a theater there like the Newport Casino. So then it became known just as the Ardsley Club, or ultimately as the Ardsley Country Club. And so, but this shot shows, again, the train station, the same design that we saw in the clubhouse. So this started the evolution, however, of the Ardsley train station. So, while creating a private train station for an exclusive country club was quite a feat, As I said, Barber had more ambitious plans for the new enclave of Ardsley Park surrounding the Ardsley Club. Falling back on his real estate experience, he had formed the Lorena Company in the summer of 1896, and he transferred to this new company substantial portions of the property he had acquired in Irvington and Dobbs Ferry. And the goal of this new company was to develop all this property into the new Ardsley Park neighborhood. And the Lorena Company was named after his daughter, Lorena Langdon Barber. And so this is a description, again, from another brochure that the Lorena Company put together describing this new area of Ardsley-on-Hudson. And so it says the immediate tract known as Ardsley-on-Hudson has always been beautiful. It was chosen by its present owners, the Lorena Company, because it, more than any other section of the Hudson, combined all the requisites of an ideal spot which gentlemen of wealth might erect homes and be secure in the confidence they could always be free from the encroachments of unpleasant surroundings or conditions. And while perhaps a little more in floral language, it echoes often some of the way that real estate even today is pitched in many of the areas outside New York City. You know, I live here in Irvington, and I think Irvington is not, I like for Irvington, I don't think it's stuffy or whatever, as perhaps some other parts on the eastern part of Westchester. But clearly, it's still a draw. It's a very beautiful spot, has a lot of beautiful homes, and it's part of what leads people to decide to move up here from the city. So again, this is the map we looked at before, and again, this road, which became Ardsley Avenue West, in this area between the casino and the Hudson River tracks, where the station was, Barber transferred all this to the Lorena Company. And so it had this station house, had this powerhouse, and this powerhouse is still, it's the brick building at the southern end of the Ardsley train station parking lot. You still see it there. That was the powerhouse that was used to generate electricity and gas for all of Ardsley Park. Okay. So putting the Ardsley train station on the map. So again, for the first several years of its existence, the Ardsley train station remained a private train station that was only used by special trains stopping for club members during the summer season. Remember, when the Arsley Club was opened in 1896 and this train station was created, there were only, at that time, only 5 or 6 large summer estates near the station. There was Nevis, which was on the Columbia property just north of Ardsley Park, and Nevis is still there today. There was Newport, which was the large Italian mansion that was part of the property that actually the Barber transferred to the Lorena Company as part of the development of the new Ardsley Park. There was Agawam, which was a large summer estate and mansion owned by one second. It was owned by General Samuel Thomas, and it was actually on the grounds of the Mercy College, much of the Mercy College today. There was Ardsley, which was Barber's home, the old Cyrus Field home, but it was actually Ardsley Towers, which he called Ardsley, which was on the eastern side of Broadway. And there were 2 other large mansions, one called the Hampton House and Guilford, which had been built by Cyrus Field on the eastern side of Broadway for his children, and were now being leased out during the summer to wealthy families from New York. And on the right, this is a system map for the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company in 1900. And you'll see, although it shows stops at Hastings and Dobbs Ferry and Irvington and Tarrytown, it doesn't show the stop at Ardsley-on-Hudson because that stop did not yet exist as part of the normal commuting lines for the railroad. So the Lorena Company began to develop Ardsley Park as a neighborhood, and they built 2 homes. The first 2 homes they built in Ardsley Park were on the east side of Hancock Place, and they sold to Ardsley Club members in 1897. The first house was built and sold by Lorena to Isabel Judson, who was the daughter of Cyrus Field and Mary Field, and the mother of Cyrus Field Judson Jr. It's one of the founders of the Ardsley Club. The second house was built by Lorena Company and sold to Ellie F. Griffin, who was the wife of General Eugene Griffin, who was a vice president of the General Electric Company. 2 years later, the Lorena Company sold 2 lots to Brigadier General Avery Delano Andrews. And those 2 lots were on the northwest corner of Hudson Avenue West and Hancock Place. And Andrews was a retired military officer, and he was the general counsel of Barber Asphalt Paving Company and a member of the club. And interestingly, the deed with General Andrews provided for, and this is a quote, sufficient and convenient right-of-way between the premises heretofore described, this is the property that Andrews bought, and the public highways and the Ardsley station on the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad, through and over other streets or roads on the property of the Lorena Company. And what's key here is that Barber realized and Lorena Company realized that one of the selling points they had for selling property in the new Ardsley Park was ensuring that the buyers had access to the Ardsley train station. And even though this property to Andrews was sold in 1899, and the Ardsley train station was still just a private station for the club members, Lorena and Barber realized that in the future that could change. And if people were going to buy property with the idea of commuting to New York, they had to have regular access to the train station. And I think that Barber even at that point knew that the train station would become ultimately a regular commuter station on the Hudson River line. Another thing that happened at this time was as of December 1st, 1897, the United States official postal guide listed a post office, Ardsley-on-Hudson, for the first time. And unclear if the post office was initially located at the actual Ardsley train station or in the Ardsley Club, but I think it was likely it was in the train station itself. You know, since the 1860s, the Postal Service had been operating its railway mail service, in which mail was picked up at train stations and transferred and sorted on special railroad cars as they went along on the rail lines. And so having access to train stations was a key strategy for the postal office. And the Ardsley train station itself became part of that system. And so the club members at the Ardsley Casino, which was part of the plan, would use the Ardsley train station pier for their yachts. And so on the left is a picture of Omsie Barber's yacht, Sapphire. And he, as I said, was a yachting enthusiasm. And in the first few years of the Ardsley Country Club, he actually purchased a series of steam yachts, which he named Sapphire. But in 1903, as again, very much of the rich, they would compete by who could buy the biggest yacht. Sound familiar today? He bought and purchased a 300-foot-long turbine-powered yacht in England, which he named Lorena. And it was thought to be, it was the first steam yacht that had turbine engines used in the Atlantic Ocean. And it was thought to be the fastest yacht in the steam yacht in the world. Time it was launched in 1903. And when he was not otherwise traveling around the world or chartering out his yacht to others, he would sail it between Irvington and New York City, and he would dock it off the Ardsley Club Pier just outside the train station. And other club members did the very same thing. This is an image of John Jacob Astor's IV yacht, Normahal, which was another enormous yacht, another club member yacht. And it was about 233 feet long. And other Ardsley Club members who were also members of the New York Yacht Club also had these enormous steam yachts and would sail them up and down the river up to the Ardsley Casino or Ardsley Country Club. For example, George Gould had a steam yacht called the Atlanta. It was about 243 feet long. David Dow's, which people know that name in our village, had the steam yacht Thespia, which is 185 feet long. Frank J. Gould had the steam yacht Helenita, which is 185 feet long. William K. Vanderbilt, who was Cornelius Vanderbilt II's son, he had the steam yacht the Valiant, which is 332 feet long. And J.P. Morgan had the steam yacht Corsair, which was 165 feet long. And just as an example, the Goulds, George Gould and Frank J. Gould, would routinely commute from the Ardsley Country Club down to New York City on Gould's yacht Atlanta every day, and they would sail back and forth, and it would anchor off the Ardsley train station. So let's talk a little bit about station number 9. As Omsie Barber remained the member in charge of the New York Yacht Club Station number 9 at the Ardsley-on-Hudson train station until 1903, when he was replaced by William Land Bull. And William Land Bull was the president of the New York Stock Exchange from 1888 to 1890, and a very well-to-do member of the business and social elite. He owned a large estate on the west side of Hudson, just north of Sunnyside, essentially where Belvedere is today. And he was also a very enthusiastic yachter. He owned the steam yacht Soyanara, and Bull remained the member in charge of the New York Yacht Club, Station number 9, until he resigned in 1907 and was replaced by Franklin Q. Brown, who was another New York Yacht Club member, and at that time, the president of the Ardsley Club. Now, for those of you in Dobbs Ferry, Franklin Q. Brown and his wife Ida owned the Silverhurst estate, and which was a large estate in the middle of Dobbs Ferry. And Franklin Brown and his wife were leaders in the Dobbs Ferry community for many, many years. So a year after Barber's death in 1909, however, the New York Yacht Club decided to ultimately close the New York Yacht Club Station number 9 at the Arsley Pier. I think their interest and their connection, Barber had been a big proponent of this, but the interest and draw faded, and so the Yacht Club decided to close number 9. So the other big shift was in November of 1903, the Lorena Company conveyed to New York Central and Hudson Railroad Company 2 gores, 2 small slices of property between the land owned by the Ardsley Club and the railroad track bed along the river in Ardsley Park. And these parcels included the station building and the covered portico on the easterly side of the railroad tracks. So essentially, they transferred to the railroad station itself what had been for many years this private station building. The Lorena Company also conveyed a right-of-way between Ardsley train station and Broadway over the 2 roads that were owned by the Lorena Company, which were Ardsley Avenue West and Hudson Road West. And they further agreed that as long as the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company maintained a passenger station at or about the location of the existing Ardsley-on-Hudson station, Lorena Company would keep these roadways open for full, free, and uninterrupted use on feet or in vehicles. And again, it shows the planning by Barber and then ultimately by the Lorena Company about the importance of the train station to the broader development of this new development of Ardsley Park. They recognize that one of the draws of this new community, if they're going to bring up these new suburbanites, was they could commute back and forth between the city and these new gorgeous homes easily by having immediate access to the railroad station. So this is the map showing the property that was conveyed by Lorena to the railroad company in 1903. And you'll see here, this is the casino. This map is the northern part is looking west, so that's the Hudson River. This is the dock of the Ardsley train station at that time. This is the train station building, and the parcel of property that was conveyed by Lorena Company is this parcel number 5 right here, which extended from this point up to here. and included the railroad station and the portico in front of the railroad station. And on this map, you see a couple other things. You see the walkway that leads from the portico up to the casino. You see this power building, which is the brick power building that was used to power the Ardsley Park neighborhood. And that brick building is still there today. An interesting little thing, there was actually this other building right here called Locomobile. And Barber and his son Davis, his son-in-law, Stephen Davis, were big promoters of Locomobile, which was a car manufacturing company. And it was actually had its manufacturing facilities in Tarrytown, but they had offices here at the Ardsley train station and at the Ardsley Casino. Okay, and this is another interesting map done at the same time, which I thought was really showed the connection between the railway mail service and the Ardsley train station. Again, this building right here, that's the Ardsley train station. But what this map shows, two interesting things. This is the passenger ramp on the parts of the track that would be going north, and at the end of it is a mail crane. And over here on the south-facing tracks is another mail crane. And on the right-hand side, you see a picture of what this mail crane looked like. And these mail cranes were developed by the Post Office Railway Mail Service to allow moving trains to pick up mail on the fly as a train went past the station at speed. So as a train was coming down the tracks toward a stop that had one of these mail cranes, the railway mail service clerk on the train would prepare what he called a catcher arm. They would then lean out over the train and snatch that bag that held all the mail as the train sped by. And the iron arms of the crane would release the bags immediately. And at the same time, the clerk would kick out of the car, the passing car, the outgoing mail that would go to that station. And when the clerk picked up the mail off one of these cranes, it would then put in this special railroad car where post office workers would sort the mail. And this system for exchanging mail from moving trains operated from about 1870 to the 1930s. And it was a really important part of the mail service, and perhaps one of the reasons why the Ardsley train station continued to be a post office for so many years. The service began kind of a steady decline in the late 1940s as airline and automobile passenger traffic grew, and was finally discontinued, I believe, in the late 40s. So for the next 20 years, between 1900 and 1922, the Lorena Company continued to sell parcels of property as single-family homes as it developed out the Ardsley Park area. And this map of the Ardsley Park, which is from 1926 and was published by Lorena Company, shows how that has developed. And so again, over here on the left, you see the Hudson River, you see the Ardsley Country Club right there, you see the station house right there. This is Ardsley Avenue. This is Hudson Line right here. This is Broadway. And then over on this side, you see, again, the Ardsley neighborhood as it extended up into the hills. Whoops, let me go back for a second. This is the golf course. And at that time, the golf course extended down here, down to the casino, down to the clubhouse. And so that was part of the course, then extend over here, and then up into the hills around this area around here. And as I said, one of the important parts of this was in the deeds for the property it was selling throughout Ardsley Park, they would give a right of way over all these streets, which weren't dedicated to the village of Irvington and Dobbs Ferry until the early 1920s. They would give a right of way over those streets to the new homeowners so they could either take a horse and carriage, or if they had a new car, they could drive down to the Ardsley train station and then commute back and forth into New York City. Again, demonstrating, highlighting the importance the original vision by Barber, the importance of having this train station to his ability to develop this Ardsley Park area along here in Irvington. So this is a picture of the train station, probably in the 1910 or between 1910 and 1920. Again, you can still see the Ardsley Club above the train station. You now see that there is a metal walkway, an open metal walkway that extends over the tracks, so that someone can walk from the train station over the tracks down to the south-facing part of the train. You see a steam engine going north, and it again reflects the fact that this train station had evolved from simply being purely a private train station for the casino into an active commuter station for the new and growing Arsley Park neighborhood. So, as many of you know, in 1927, basically the Ardsley train station survived the closure of the Ardsley Club. So in 1927, some members of the Ardsley Club who lived in the nearby neighborhood of Ardsley Park decided they wanted to create a slightly less ostentatious club for families. There were a number of new families in the neighborhood. And they purchased the old Ardsley Club stables, which was the building that still exists. If you drive on Ardsley Avenue West down toward the train station, and as it curves around to the right, you see a large, it's now a two-home, single-family home. But that was the old Ardsley Club stables, and they purchased that and created the Ardsley Swimming Club, which they was later renamed as the Ardsley Racket and Swimming Club. But due to the Depression, the original Ardsley Club began losing members, and the club discovered it could no longer afford to continue to lease its golf course. It was just basically being priced out. And in 1934, November of 1934, the holding company that owned the Ardsley Club properties agreed to consolidate with what had become the newly formed Ardsley Racket and Swimming Club. And in December of 1934, the remaining members of the original Ardsley Club agreed to dissolve that club. And what became known then as the Ardsley Country Club was centered in the old Ardsley Club stables, right along there on Ardsley Avenue West, and that became the Ardsley Country Club going forward. And so the old Ardsley Club building, which had been the original casino building, which was above the Ardsley train station, in 1936 it was torn down, and construction was begun on the new Hudson House apartments. And as you'll see from this ad at the time, a key selling point for the Hudson House was that it was only a 38-minute commute to Grand Central. And because more and more people were driving cars down to the Ardsley train station, at this time, the village also made the Ardsley Avenue West from Clinton Place down to the train station, and from the station on Hudson Avenue West up to Clinton Place, a one-way street. So it became a one-way around for people to drive down there, either park or drop people off and head back up. But again, it highlights that the train station had evolved, from this private exclusive train station just for club members. It was now part and parcel of the broader neighborhood and an important element for allowing people to commute down to New York City from their homes up in Irvington. An important role at the train station were the roles of station master and postmaster at the Ardsley train station. And from 1905 to 1923, Edward Hempstead, who was a New York Central and Hudson River Railroad Company employee, held the positions of both station master and postmaster at the Ardsley train station. And in 1923, his longtime assistant, a man named Fred Ravakes, took over the position of postmaster, and he held that position till 1933. But in 1933, however, he was forced to leave that position because he lived in Dobbs Ferry, not in Ardsley-on-Hudson. And there was a lot of suggestion at the time in the local papers that Fred Ravekes lost the position because he was Republican. And with the new advent of the Franklin Roosevelt administration and the fact that while the postmaster of any of these post offices was a civil service position, it was also a patronage position. And so the suggestion, the change of the administration in 1932 may have impacted why Ravekes was not allowed to continue. However, because no one from Ardsley-on-Hudson agreed to take the position of postmaster, there was no one to become postmaster. So the Postmaster General in Washington agreed that residents of Irvington could also apply. And a man named W. Edward Sweetman took over that position. And Edward Sweetman remained the postmaster at the Ardsley train station until about 1949. And I actually believe today that Edward Sweetman's granddaughter is listening into this presentation. And in addition, Lang Stevenson, who was a longtime resident of Irvington and Omsie Barber's great-grandson, a longtime member of the Ardsley Country Club, told me that he remembers as a boy going into the post office, the Ardsley train station, and talking to Postmaster Edward Sweetman. So it was a big part of the community, and it was a big, important part of the Ardsley train station at the time. After the war, after World War II, however, the village was struggling with growth in population, and it began struggling with traffic congestion, including traffic congestion and parking at the Ardsley train station. And parking at the small lot at the Ardsley train station at the time was open to anyone and was often filled with cars from surrounding villages. And a number of the local residents complained about this. They did these surveys to show that most of the people parking at the Ardsley train station were not actually residents of Ardsley Park or Irvington or nearby Dobbs Ferry, but from further away. So to ease congestion, again in 1954, the village studied the possibility about extending Half Moon Lane, which is north of the Ardsley Park area, to Ardsley Avenue West, and barring any parking on Ardsley Avenue West and Hudson Road West. This was all part of a big, broader traffic study. But the local Ardsley Park residents opposed any parking limits and concerned that it would reduce ridership at the station. And they were concerned that it would result in the closure of the station building, the end of train service at Ardsley-on-Hudson. There was also a lot of opposition from residents of Half Moon Lane, which was north, because if you had a cut through on that lane, that would make that street a much busier street. An interesting side note from this parking congestion and the traffic congestion study from 1954. Another suggestion in that study was by the village consultants was proposed that the village create a limited access road on top of the Croton Aqueduct, which would run from West Sunnyside down to West Hudson, right through the village. And that was never done. And for those of you who enjoy the walkway along the old Croton Aqueduct today, which is a big, wonderful part of our villages, it would have been, I think, a travesty to have opened that up to make it a roadway instead of the beautiful walkway and park that it is today. So for those of you who get oriented, this is actually a picture of the area of, this is Hudson House right here. This is the railroad station down here. Just north of it, this is the southern end of Half Moon Lane. And this area here is the wooded area, which is part of Nevis, the Columbia property of Nevis. And so again, this proposal at the time in 1954 was to extend this roadway, Half Moon Lane, through this area down to Ardsley Avenue down here. And in addition, the village decided perhaps one way of relieving the parking problems, they leased this land from Nevis at the time and planned to build big parking lots in there that people could then park in those lots and go down to the station. But despite leasing that property for 5 or 6 years, for some reason, the village never decided to build parking lots. And I think it was a lot due to the opposition of the neighbors, both the neighbors in Ardsley Park to the south and the neighbors to along Hudson Avenue Hudson Lane to the north. So during the calendar year 1959, only 6,800 ticket holders had used the Ardsley train station, of whom only 1,522 are regular commuters during the entire year. And in January 1961, the New York Central Railroad, as it was called at the time, filed a petition to close the Ardsley Park Railroad station and do away with all services of the ticket agent. Village residents protested, concerned this was only the first step in stopping all train service to the Ardsley train station. And over 100 village residents appeared at the Park Service Commission hearing considering this petition. And the railroad backed down and said it would maintain the waiting room in the Ardsley train station and continue regular service. And maintaining the waiting room meant that the railroad continue to preserve the station building, which is where that waiting room was. That was a very big concession by the railroad. But the Ardsley train station began to show its age. And in the late 1960s, early 1970s, New York Central Railroad merged with the Pennsylvania Railroad. But 2 years later, the new Penn Central declared bankruptcy. And in 1972, the MTA took over control of the Hudson commuter lines, but allowed Penn Central and later Conrail to operate the Hudson line. And then in 1983, the MTA took over operational control of the Hudson commuter line under its new Metro North Commuter Rail Division. And that included taking over control of the Ardsley train station. Now, in an effort to upgrade many of the stations along the Hudson line in 2004 and 2005, Metro North removed the original walkway and constructed a new higher walkway over the tracks of the train station. But they didn't do anything to upgrade the station itself. Despite that, the Ardsley train station still offered a lot of scenic setting for Hollywood. And these are stills from 3 of the films that were filmed at the train station. On the upper left is Falling in Love, which had Meryl Streep and Robert De Niro. The upper right is from the movie Unfaithful, which had Richard Gere and Diane Lane. And in the south, in the bottom is a film still from Girl on the Train with Emily Blunt. Another really fascinating thing was in the early 90s, Diet Pepsi decided that they were going to try to sell Diet Pepsi to all the new commuters. And they came up with this commercial at the Ardsley train station. Let's see if I can run that.
Chug along. Pinstripe suits and high-heel shoes. The daily grind gives them all the blues. Don't work me over, I know what works good. While the best thing though is so misunderstood. Just give me what the doctor ordered. Just what the doctor ordered. Just give me a Dr. Pepper, we want it. Whoa, just what the doctor ordered. The taste that's made to order, we love it.
So I don't know how many of you saw your commute. I commuted through the Ardsley train station for many years. It doesn't kind of reflect my mood sometimes, but it's a great little film. So for those of you who remember, been here for years, again, on the upper left, you'll see that's the walkway that ran from the Ardsley train station up to originally the Ardsley Casino, and then for many years up to Hudson House. And at the bottom right is a picture of that walkway as it was when I first moved to Ardsley-on-Hudson in the late 90s. But in January 2010, a private Cortland sanitation truck hit the walkway from Hudson House early on a Saturday morning to the walkway to the Ardsley train station. And the bridge was so damaged that it was a quick decision to tear it down. And they tore down both the bridge and the portico in front of the train station. Now, when they made the movie Girl on the Train, which was filmed in 2016, the movie production company rebuilt a portico. And when filming was done, they decided to agree to leave that portico. So the portico you see on the front of the train station today is not the original portico, but in fact comes from that Girl on the Train movie. So in But the train station has continued to suffer a little bit. In 2018, the Hudson House commissioned a report to kind of assess the history and architectural conditions of the train station. And the report stated that the station's architecture was an eclectic combination of Tudor Revival and shingle style, but the building retains a high amount of historical integrity, but is in poor condition and exhibits an ongoing lack of maintenance to prevent water infiltration, unfortunately. So what is its current status? What's the current status of the train station? Well, in October of 2015, the MTA, which owns the train station, leased the station to an entity called Ardsley Train Station, Inc. for 259 years. The logic of that perhaps escapes me, but that's what they did. The tenant expressly agreed to take good care of the station and to promptly make all structural and non-structural repairs, restorations, and replacements when needed to maintain and preserve the station. And any repairs or restoration to the exterior of the building had to be consistent with federal and state standards and guidelines for historic buildings. Unfortunately, no work was ever done to preserve the station building. And in February 2020, the MTA terminated that lease and obtained a holdover judgment to gain sole control of the station back to the MTA. But that was right before the pandemic began. And as you all know, that in March of 2020, because of the pandemic, New York State put a moratorium on all evictions, both of tenant leases, but also commercial leases. And as a result, before the MTA could execute on that judgment and its warrant of eviction, a moratorium was put in place, so it could not take back control of the station. But I still think there's hope for the future. Despite the challenges it faces, the Ardsley-on-Hudson train station continues to be a unique and historic building in our community. The post office in the building continues to serve local residents, continues to be an important stop in the Metro North, and is a gateway for the Mercy College Dobbs Ferry campus. And in 2021, the Ardsley Park Property Owners Association, Mercy College, and Hudson House formed a new not-for-profit called Friends of the Ardsley-on-Hudson train station to advocate for the preservation of the station building. And this new community organization is in active dialogue with the MTA about the needed steps to preserve the building and possible solutions for its future years. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. I will have a question and answer session in a moment. But I just want to quickly say to mark your calendars for our next Zoom presentation, which will be on March 6th, 2022, which will be about the Untermeyer Gardens. It'll be led by Steve Burns, who is the president of the Untermeyer Gardens Conservancy. So let me stop sharing my screen and let me look at the chat to see if we have any, what questions there might be. So one of the questions early on was, what is the building behind the train station, the first photo? And again, that's the Ardsley Casino that was built above, and that's where the Hudson House is today. One of the questions is, was Trinidad paid for the asphalt? I'm not quite sure. I think part of the concession was that, yes, there was a concession. It was probably with the British government, though, and whether the Trinidad government, which at the time was part of Britain, what they got or how that payment was done, I don't know. I'm not sure. So one of the questions, what was the purpose of the building further along from the station on the road, on the left side of the parking lot as you go up toward Hudson West? That old brick building was the power building for the Ardsley Electric Company and the Ardsley Water Company, and it housed the electrical generating equipment that was used to create electricity for the Ardsley Casino and the train station, but also all of Ardsley Park. Let's see. I had a question about whether the Ardsley Casino allowed Jewish members. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Perhaps somebody who has has looked at the history of the Ardsley Casino would know that for the answer. Someone noted, interesting though, that today the fastest train from Ardsley-on-Hudson takes 46 minutes, while some of the materials we showed, it took 38 minutes. I think there are more stops on the Hudson line today. It's Greystone, Glenwood, Ludlow. I think some of those stops, and then along the Harlem River, they didn't exist when in the 30s, when some of the early train stations were. Was the first name Omsie a nickname? I think that was his actual name. I think Omsie Barber, that was his actual name, I believe. And so a question, isn't there a path from the old Irvington High School to the station? That I don't know. I think the old Irvington High School was up on, originally was up on Main Street. I don't know if there's a pathway from that or not. I don't know that. And then someone asked, I used to walk up from the station to Mercy College from 2008 to 2010 and wanted to heard that they've added a nice walkway. And in fact, as for those of you who use the train station today, one of the big gripes about the Arsley train station is when you walked up the Mercy College campus, you had to walk up the roadway. But several years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, after a long effort, Mercy College, working with the village and with the MTA, built a new walkway on the side of the parking lot, which is actually very beautiful and very nicely landscaped. And that's a much safer way to get from the train station up to the Mercy College. Let's see, other questions. Someone said they thought the Arsley Casino burned down. I don't believe that's the case. I obviously wasn't here, but from the news reports I see, it was torn down. Whether there was an actual fire in the Ardsley Casino, that I don't know. I see a couple of people have mentioned that as a possibility. Let's see, other questions. And someone asked about the community Barber created in DC that excluded blacks, and to do the same thing in Ardsley Park. I have looked through all of the deeds that Lorena sold to people when they created Ardsley Park, and it did not have, in the deeds at least, any restrictions on who could purchase property. Now, whether there was a more informal, restrictive nature of the Ardsley Park community, I'm not so sure, but that's a possibility, no doubt about that. So someone asked, did anyone ever occupy the apartment on the second floor of the station house? And I don't know that. I don't know. I think that the Ardsley train station did have offices up there, but who occupied it, I'm not currently sure. So someone asked about the current work that's being done on the train station. So there are, as people know who've used it, there are partitions that have been put up. I think the current tenant has put those partitions up, supposedly so they can then do work within upstairs and on the waiting room on the south side of the station house. Now, whether that's going to happen or what they're going to do with that is yet to be seen. So look, we've been going for longer than I thought, maybe an hour and a half. So I think that we're going to have to stop with questions. What I'd like to do is ask Veronica Gedrich, who's the president of the Ardsley Historical Society, to rejoin the talk. Let me turn your video on. And Veronica, if you could rejoin and then maybe have some closing remarks, that'd be great.
I think I'm there.
You are.
Yep. Thank you, Chet. That was fabulous. Really enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today.